At the dawn of the 18th century, two figures stood poised to redraw Europe: Charles XII of Sweden and Peter the Great of Russia. Charles, a teenage king, was a military genius with a fierce courage, leading a powerful Swedish empire. Peter, nearly 7 feet tall, ruled a vast backward Russia, determined to modernize it. Their clash was inevitable, a personal duel on a continental scale. The Great Northern War was not just about territory, it was a battle of ideas and strategies. Charles believed in swift battles while Peter favored attrition. Their personalities defined the conflict, with Charles's overconfidence and Peter's pragmatism. The outcome would alter the balance of power for centuries. The world watched, unaware of the profound changes to come. The Swedish Empire, once a land of dense forests and icy coasts, rose to become a European superpower, its influence stretching across the Baltic Sea and far beyond. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Sweden was not just a kingdom, it was a force that shaped the fate of nations. Its armies, renowned for their discipline and innovation, became a benchmark for military excellence, feared and respected by friend and foe alike. Charles XII, a young and determined monarch, inherited this formidable force. Under his rule, Sweden was a Baltic powerhouse, controlling vital trade routes and projecting power across northern Europe. But such dominance bred envy and fear. Rivals like Russia, Poland, and Denmark watched Sweden's rise with growing alarm, seeing its strength as a direct threat to their own ambitions. In 1700, these uneasy neighbors formed a coalition and struck, believing the young king would be easily overwhelmed by their combined might. But they gravely underestimated Charles. With remarkable speed and audacity, he led his troops to a stunning victory over Denmark, forcing them to sue for peace almost immediately. In a daring amphibious assault, Charles landed his army outside Copenhagen, catching the Danes off guard and compelling them to surrender. With Denmark subdued, Charles turned his attention eastward. He led his seasoned soldiers through harsh winter landscapes, marching towards Russia, determined to confront his next great adversary. The coalition's miscalculation proved catastrophic. Their hopes of a swift victory were shattered as their armies fell back in disarray, unable to match the Swedish king's resolve. Charles was not just a king, he was a warrior born, leading from the front, inspiring fierce loyalty in his men, and earning a reputation as one of Europe's most formidable commanders. His rapid victories sent shockwaves through Europe. Diplomats and monarchs watched in awe and fear, realizing that the balance of power was shifting before their eyes, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation with Peter the Great of Russia. The world braced itself as the Swedish storm gathered strength, ready to sweep across the continent and change the course of history. For Peter, the lessons ahead would be harsh and unforgettable, as the fate of empires hung in the balance. With Denmark defeated, Charles XII of Sweden turned his attention to a new adversary. The young and ambitious king was determined to expand his influence and saw an opportunity to strike at Russia. Charles faced the Russians at Narva, a critical battle that would test his military prowess and strategic acumen. Outnumbered, he used a blinding snowstorm to his advantage. The harsh weather conditions played a crucial role, masking the movements of his troops and disorienting the Russian forces. The Swedish army charged with ferocity, causing chaos among Peter's troops. The Russians, unprepared for such a bold maneuver, were thrown into disarray. The Russian army collapsed, a national humiliation for Russia. The defeat at Narva was a significant blow to Peter the Great's ambitions and a stark reminder of the challenges he faced. Charles became the hero of Europe, believing Russia was no longer a threat. His victory was celebrated across the continent, and he was hailed as a military genius. Instead of pursuing Peter, he turned to Poland, a strategic mistake. This decision would have far-reaching consequences, as it allowed Peter time to regroup and strengthen his forces. This gave Peter time to rebuild and learn from his defeat. He was determined to transform his army and ensure that such a humiliation would never happen again. Charles's focus on Poland allowed Peter to transform his army. The Russian military underwent significant reforms, adopting new tactics and modernizing its equipment. The humiliation at Narva forged Peter's resolve. He was more determined than ever to build a powerful and resilient military force. While Charles chased victories in Poland, Peter was preparing for a comeback. The Russian leader's focus was unwavering, and he meticulously planned his next moves. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation. The balance of power in Europe was about to shift dramatically as these two titans prepared for their next encounter. Charles's overconfidence would soon be tested. His belief in his invincibility would lead him into a series of challenges that would define his legacy. The world watched as the balance of power began to shift. European leaders and diplomats closely monitored the unfolding events, aware that the outcome would have far-reaching implications. Peter's resilience was about to change the course of history. His determination and strategic acumen would soon be put to the ultimate test. The Swedish storm was about to meet the Russian bear. The impending clash would be a defining moment in the Great Northern War, altering the fate of nations. While Charles was in Poland, Peter the Great transformed Russia. He rebuilt his army, introduced conscription, and modernized the military. In 1703, Peter founded St. Petersburg on Swedish territory, a bold move. The city symbolized his vision for a modern Russia. Charles dismissed these developments focused on Poland. He believed he could defeat Russia again at will. Peter's gamble was paying off, setting the stage for a final confrontation. The Russian bear was learning to fight. Charles's distractions in Poland were costly. Peter's reforms were creating a formidable force. The stage was set for a decisive battle. The Swedish lion was about to face a new Russian army. The outcome would reshape Europe. By 1707, Charles XIV of Sweden, the young and ambitious king, was ready to confront Russia head-on. His army, renowned across Europe for its discipline and courage, had already achieved a string of impressive victories. Now, Charles set his sights on Moscow, determined to bring the Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, to his knees and secure Swedish dominance in the north. But Peter was not to be underestimated. He ordered his forces to adopt a scorched earth policy, burning villages, destroying crops, and leaving nothing for the advancing Swedes. The Russian countryside became a wasteland, denying Charles's army the supplies they desperately needed. The Swedish army, once so confident, now struggled through the barren, frozen landscape. Hunger and exhaustion set in as the soldiers marched deeper into Russia, their morale slowly eroding with each passing day. At Lesnaya, Peter's forces struck a devastating blow, intercepting a vital Swedish supply convoy. The loss of food, ammunition, and reinforcements was a disaster for Charles's campaign. Forced to abandon his original plan, Charles turned south, hoping to find support in Ukraine. But the winter of 1708 to 1709 was one of the harshest in memory, and the Swedish army was ill-prepared for the brutal cold. Starvation and disease swept through the camps. Thousands of soldiers perished, their dreams of victory frozen in the snow. The once mighty Swedish force was decimated by cold and hunger, reduced to a shadow of its former self. At Poltava, in June 1709, Peter finally gave Charles the decisive battle he craved. The two armies faced off on the open field, the fate of empires hanging in the balance. The reformed Russian army, drilled and modernized by Peter, stood firm against the Swedish onslaught. Their discipline and firepower proved overwhelming, crushing the exhausted Swedes. Charles himself was wounded and barely escaped the battlefield, fleeing into exile in the Ottoman Empire. His dream of conquering Russia was shattered in a single day. The Battle of Poltava shattered the Swedish Empire, ending its era as a great power. For Russia, it was a moment of triumph, marking the rise of a new force in European politics. The balance of power in Europe had shifted dramatically. Old alliances crumbled, and new ones formed as nations recognized Russia's growing might. Peter's resilience, vision, and reforms had paid off. He had transformed Russia from a regional backwater into a major European power. The Swedish storm had been broken, its soldiers retreating in defeat, their empire forever diminished. Across Europe, the world witnessed the dawn of a new era. The old order was gone, and a new power had emerged on the horizon. Russia, under Peter the Great, now stood proudly among the great powers of Europe, its influence destined to shape the continent for centuries to come. After Poltava, the war dragged on. Charles returned to Sweden determined to fight on. He achieved minor victories but faced overwhelming odds. The anti-Swedish coalition reformed, eager to dismantle the empire. Peter consolidated his gains, capturing key Baltic cities. The Russian navy proved its strength at the Battle of Gangut. Charles's death in 1718 marked the end of Sweden's greatness. The war had bled the kingdom dry. Negotiations with Russia began, formalizing the new reality. The Swedish Empire was no more. Peter's vision had been realized. The stage was set for a new European order. The Great Northern War ended with the Treaty of Nystad in 1721. Sweden ceded vast territories to Russia, cementing its access to the Baltic. For Sweden, it was the end of an era. For Russia, it was transformative, marking its rise as a superpower. Peter the Great's vision had been realized. The war reshaped the geopolitical map of Northern Europe. It was a story of leadership, resilience, and destiny. The clash between Sweden and Russia offers timeless lessons. The choices of a few define the fate of millions. The echoes of this war still resonate today.